Well, first off, just want to thank Coach McElvany and MHSAA for asking SVSU to talk. And today we're going to talk a little bit about inside zone and some of the things that we do at SVSU and kind of how I always like anytime I talk to somebody about a scheme or we're trying to take something, I always try to get just kind of the origin of where it came from and how you got to where you're at and why you're doing it the way you're doing it now and those types of things. So, we've kind of, it's been a long journey to get where we're at. And so just a little bit of background about us and our program and what we're trying to accomplish. Coach Brady's been at SVSU for a little over a year, and it's been great. Honestly, I think, we're really excited about the direction that we're headed and things like that. But this will be going on my third year at SVSU coming up in 2020. So, came from Alma College, was there for 4 years, was there from 2014 to 2017. And that was kind of my introduction back into Michigan. Kind of going backwards, I had been at Wisconsin-Stevens Point before that. Did my GA there, got a chance to get my first full-time job there as an instructor and an assistant football coach, coaching the offensive line for Tom Durnell and Aaron Blicko and John Mish and some guys that got me into college coaching. And originally started my coaching career at Grand Haven High School. I was a defensive line coach there in 2009. That was my first job. And then I played at GVSU under Coach Kelly and Coach Martin from 2003 to 2006. So that's kind of how I got to SVSU. And, I think there's a lot there when you go all the way back to, we had played on some really great teams at Grand Valley in the mid-2000s. And I think the theme at that time for us was simplicity. And so we didn't run a lot of plays. We had some really good players, but we tried to stay really simple in terms of what we did schematically. And so hopefully this kind of leads into the stuff that we're going to talk about today without spending too much time on it. But then, learned really everything that I was able to learn about inside zone and some of the things that we do heavily now. Obviously, Jeff Quinn was my offensive line coach that is offensive line coach at Notre Dame now. And then I learned a lot from George Barnett, who was at Grand Valley after I got done there. That's with Chuck down in Miami, and learned so much from him. So, I think do a few things and do it well are kind of hopefully the themes, that we've taken. And as we've gotten older and older and learned more and seen more, I think the more we've leaned on doing a few things and trying to do them as well as we can. So, but I think since Coach Brady's, got on board, I think there's been a really neat feel to our program and our culture and just kind of guys' response to his leadership and his regime. I think, we just signed an outstanding recruiting class we're really excited about. So I think fortunately enough for us as an offensive line, it was going, I think in 2018 was my first year, and I got there in the spring and was able to, be with those guys during the spring. And then we went through the fall and we were kind of not very good, and we gradually got better. But that entire class of kids had, the entire group of seniors was not there. So we had every single guy back from 18 to 19. And when Coach came in, we wanted to change some principles of the offense and the way we motion and the way we did certain things. But we really didn't change, we didn't change the things that I was doing in terms of teaching and how we taught power, how we taught inside zone, how we taught some of these base, things. So we're able to just kind of pick up where we left off in terms of our guys and from a teaching standpoint. So I think just always, anytime we get a chance to address high school coaches, we want to talk about what we're looking for in recruiting. And, I think we're really fortunate that we coach in one of the best states in the union. And I think you hear a lot of things about a lot of other states, down south and different places where guys are getting paid absurd amounts of money to coach football, or there's emphases or, places where they ignore the rules and things like that and do all these things that they really cater everything towards football. I think that doesn't necessarily happen in Michigan, but we're so lucky in Michigan because we've got so many great coaches across the state that love kids, that love ball. And obviously we've got one of the, Michigan high school football is one of the best brands, I think, in America. And we're really lucky that we get to, we have so many great players, so many great coaches, so many great programs right here in our backyard. And most of our roster obviously is made up of Michigan kids. So, and again, all my information's, down there at the bottom. So anybody has any questions or any of those things, hit me up. Always available. We're always ready to talk ball. Any coaches that want to come up, it'd be amazing if we could have some guys on our campus. It would be amazing if we could get on our own campus at this point in time here in mid-pandemic 2020. But we're excited to get back out there and let life resume here as normal, hopefully soon. So, so there's a lot of things that we'll kind of go through, but just kind of to recap kind of how we got from, the early, 20 teens to where we're at right now at SVSU. 2011, 12, 13, there was great teams at SVSU and won the GLIAC North 3 years in a row, 11, 12, and 13 under Coach Collins. And so it's been kind of, I guess just our journey to get back to that level of success. And so, obviously we don't think that we invented the wheel or football or any of those types of things. We're really excited over the course of the last couple of years as to where we were able to get to in our run game, from 14 to now. So, and again, so our primary play the last 2 years is, inside zone. So when I got to Alma College in 2014, in 2011, 12, and 13, they had won 4 total games. Those 3 years combined and ran for 92 yards a game the previous year. By 16 and 17, those 2 years combined, we averaged about 215 yards a game and set the school record for rushing touchdowns in 2016. And primary play at that point in time was inside zone. So obviously we're trying to stay within what we do the most. And I think the biggest hurdle we get when we talk to high school coaches about trying to adopt inside zone is, and we'll go over some of this stuff in the next couple of slides, but obviously, we're one of the better years we've had in 2019 in terms of running the football. I had 2 running backs over 6 yards a carry. That hasn't happened since 1998. Really excited about that. And I think anytime I want to talk to anybody about a scheme, always it's like, okay, listen, are you, where is your talent level based on some of the, the talent level of your, the people you're competing with and some of those types of things. So I think the thing I'm most proud of is, for the 6 guys that were our top 6 offensive linemen, 4 of those 6 guys came to SVSU as walk-ons. So I think obviously we feel really good about the way we teach everything and scheme and those types of things. But the biggest message that, I would send to anybody that is willing to listen is we have one of the best strength conditioning programs I've ever been a part of. I think we use a lot of big terms and big words and best and greatest and things like that. I think what I can tell you, I haven't been everywhere in the country, so I can't tell you that we have one of the best ones in the country. What I can tell you is it's by far and away the best situation I've ever been in. By far, it's not even close in terms of our strength conditioning coach, and our guys bought into the weight room. And I don't care who you are, how little you are, how untalented, your guy may be. If you're talking to high school kids and you're coaching high school kids, if they buy into the weight room, they got a chance to be a good offensive lineman. I don't care what the level is or what the circumstances are. And that's what our guys did. And I think that's why we've been able to have success. So kind of going forward from there, just a little bit of schematic stuff in terms of, what we're doing. Okay. And so when we talk about, you want to be simple, how simple do you want to be? Okay. So our different inside zone schemes, and this is the way that we started categorizing everything. We want to know obviously what the yards per carry was. We want to know how many times we called it, and we want to know, a chunk play is defined as a play of 12 yards or more in the run game, and what percentage of the time are we hitting the chunk off of this particular scheme. And then the run efficiency, you got to gain 4 yards, or half back on second down, or get a first down or score a touchdown. You have an efficient run. So, and then we want to know the negative plays. Obviously, I think there's more we got to do there in terms of charting negative plays and determining, okay, well, a -10 is different than a -1. So I think a lot of those negative plays were, a lot of -1s, just because it was maybe, a lower risk in terms of, the negatives that we potentially had. And there was other plays where we had a little bit higher chunk play percentage. But the other thing in terms of 18 chunk runs that we had in this particular set, there was, another 6 11s and 2 10s. So, there's another 8 that were really close to being chunks. And so we, if we're 2-to-1 chunk versus negative, we feel really good about that. Obviously 6 yards a carry, and something that, again, we had 366 total charted runs this year. So 43% of the time, almost half of the time, we're calling a run play. We're calling some type of inside zone. So obviously I think that's, to me, the biggest hurdle with high school coaches that I talk to a lot of times. They're like, well, we'd like to add this. It's like, well, you have to, and this is why. All right. So I think you think about the two different ways that offensive linemen can block defensive linemen or block a front. You're not necessarily blocking a man. In zone, a lot of times you're blocking really an area. Okay. So we go back and look at, the T-bone principle there at the top of the screen, and we'll go into, as we look at the tape and the drills and things like that, kind of more of what that means. But if you tell an offensive lineman, scenario A, you got to block a man, scenario B, you have to block, an area. Okay. Regardless of how that's defined. Okay. You tell that offensive lineman, listen, you have to block whatever's, at a 45-degree angle in front of you in relation to wherever the linebacker is. So you're essentially blocking a strike zone. You're not blocking a man. Anytime you tell an offensive lineman that he's going to be able to play faster if he's headed towards an area versus if he's headed towards a man, because the second step's always got to be reactive in nature whenever he's got to block a man. So I think the drawback to this particular play and this particular scheme is understanding where that strike zone is and how it functions and how it can move based on where the linebackers are, and certain things like that. I think kids are kind of taught, and generally in, their base or instinct is to block the guy that's closest to them in most cases. So I think the zone play ends up being a little bit more expensive. So I think ultimately we like it because we feel like we've got better answers to movement and, and short yardage, and it's just got more utility for us. At the same time, I think a lot of, high school coaches I've talked to are like, well, we kind of dabbled in a little bit, and guys struggled to understand what that strike zone meant and where it was and how it functioned and things like that. So they kind of gave up on it. So I would just say, if you're going to do it, you really have to commit to it. And I think, we found like, we call this 43% of the time. We're averaging over 6 yards a carry with this thing. And, 60% is kind of that base mark of we've got a really high, end in terms of total number of reps on this thing. And we feel pretty good about that. This is going to be the most consistent, conceivable way for us to attack defenses and to attack, fronts and different things that we get. So that's just kind of something I would throw out before we dive into this stuff too much. So certain things we're going to talk about, and all this stuff is outlined in different parts of the film that we'll watch here. Just make sure, nobody coaches low hands and hand height as much as we try to do. And it's just for sake of balance. I think as you watch this, you're probably going to get a vibe as to like, man, these guys don't have their shoulders maybe aren't that low to the ground, or sometimes the pad level maybe doesn't look exactly what we would necessarily like if you're like a veer team or something like that. But I think what we found is how much further we can get by making sure that, we get our guys on balance first, and then we get them as low as we can, whether it be the hips or the shoulders or the face mask or things like that after that. So just a couple things. So just going through our drills. All right. So we're going to start, and this is just kind of our drills. And I think, if we're going to make a t-shirt, advertising what we believe more so now and continually, this is something that we believe more than anything is our drills have to show up in our tape. They got to show up, and they have to show up all the time. And if they're not showing up all the time, then we're wrong and we need to change. We need to do different things. So I think now obviously blocking guys on air is just, something that we do to get our guys going as you kind of go through it and see some of the coaching points and things like that. Emphasis on steps, pace, and demeanor. Again, as we go through these air starts, we want the pace to be a little bit different. It's not going to be as fast. It's going to be more powerful and more vertical. And we talk about the inside portion of it. And again, we're going to focus on that part of it today and not dive into the wide zone portion of it. But I think those are the things we emphasize to our guys when they're going through this. And again, like, you know, it's air start. So this obviously isn't a game rep. And I don't like how upright he is, but I think in general, in order to get our guys on balance, we have to kind of make them more upright until they understand, okay, this is, you have to play with your cleats in the ground, or nothing you do is going to, you know, you're not going to be able to operate regardless of how low you are, or how hard you think you're coming off the ball, or any of those things that, you know, we always use the analogy of guys don't ever squat on their toes. Well, why can't you squat on your toes? Well, you don't have, I mean, it's impossible for you to stay on balance if you squat on your toes. And if you're not on balance, you can't be powerful. So, so some things there. But again, you see the, you know, you see double under finish is something that's really important. And again, part of it is just so guys get used to keep holding their hands lower, keeping their hands lower. And I think, you know, we want to make sure, you know, the forklift analogy of a forklift doesn't pick, you know, a pallet up at the top, it picks it up at the bottom. It's going to give us better leverage in order to move the defenders in the way that we would like to. So that's something we talk about double under finish to our guys is pretty valuable for us in terms of making sure that they're holding their hands kind of closer to their belt. I mean, obviously they can't be around their knees, but it's really important for our guys to have their hands low. Because again, when you think about the surface area that they're actually striking or blocking, is going to be you know, where the defensive lineman's torso actually is. Our hands have got to be low so we can get our hands onto that breastplate where we need them. So the next is, you know, the finish. Okay, part of it / jerk. Okay, so as you watch this stuff. This is kind of the second part of the progression. You know, we do our air starts to kind of get things going and get guys in the mind frame of inside zone and wide zone. Okay, regardless of, you know, whatever we may be doing, and then we kind of start with the finish. So this is essentially the block after the first two steps. So we're engaged. They're not on their aiming points yet. You know, and then we talk about fundamentals and things like that. And we are almost always going to do this with the defensive lineman doing two things. And I think, you know, we don't use sleds a lot. And I think the drawback to that is you have to spend so much time coaching the defenders. You know, we coach them in meetings and we do it all the time because ultimately it's just not, we feel like it's the best way to simulate what you're going to get. And obviously if those guys stand there, then it's not, you might as well use the sleds. But I think it's really important for us that, you know, we practice blocking people because that's what we're going to do when you know, when the lights turn on. So as we go through, you know, this particular drill, these guys are going to try, you know, the defensive lineman is going to try to jerk them and also try to work heavily into their gap. Our guys are going to try to work the ice, the play side number, and the backside leg through the crotch, and it really forces them to stay on balance. And I think that the thing that we run into with kids when they do this is they are oftentimes, you know, the offensive lineman will slow down a little bit just to, like, so this guy doesn't roll him, so this guy doesn't toss him and jerk him. So I think it's, you know, as we coach the defensive lineman in terms of how they need to be handling this drill, we coach our offensive linemen, you know, that this is probably the easiest way to get a pancake is if somebody tries to jerk you and they miss and then they end up on their backside. So as you kind of watch what this looks like, it's really important that you see how compact and tight the offensive lineman that's closest to us, okay, has been with us been with me for 4 years now. So he's going to stay tight this entire time. He's never going to get extended. It's really important as we watch these things that we don't get that full extension with the hands, okay, because it's critical for balance. And as you watch these guys, you know, the tighter they stay with their hands, the more on balance it allows them to be. We want them finishing these blocks with the knee drives and with their hips as you look at kind of those two guys closest to us or some older guys that know what's going on. All right, so now the next one, obviously, we go to the full base block. So what's going to go on here is, again, we just put the whole thing together and we add the first couple steps in. really important. We use the two-handed snaps. Coach Brady brought this over from Ferris, and originally just didn't know exactly, how it was going to go. And my two biggest concerns with it were, are we going to be able to run reach guys? Because, offensive linemen, especially when they're going, to the snap hand, can use that backside hand and that backside arm to kind of propel them where they want to go. And are we going to be able to pass block guys that are head up noses on us? And I think what we found was the two hands makes the snap more consistent. And we didn't necessarily have some of those other problems that I was concerned with. And I said that initially when we started, like, listen, we got to be able to run reach guys, and we got to be able to, man pass block. Obviously, defensive linemen are always going to do a good job, especially in the GLIAC. There's phenomenal. Guys are going to always find, anytime teams will give you a 3-down or a bear look or something like that, they're one of their best pass rushers. They're going to kick him down to the nose because they know it's difficult for centers to snap the ball and then block them. And so, we didn't have too many problems with it. So I went from being very skeptical of it to being a firm believer. So just based on what happened as we implemented it. But so I think there's different things that we do to work on our steps. Okay, so that's not in this presentation, but we'll do those drills in terms of just mimicking steps and steps on air and things like that. And as you watch the center closest to us, he stays tight the entire time. His feet are in the ground. His knee drives his thighs, his hips, his rear end is engaged. Okay, and that's kind of exactly what we would want that thing to look like as you watch the deal go. All right. He's engaged, the hands are low. And again, I don't think necessarily that they were, as his hands come from snapping the football to getting onto this defensive lineman. This isn't like an amazing job by this defensive lineman initially, like working to where we would want him to work. But I think, you kind of see what we're getting at and some of the things that we're trying to teach these guys. All right. So now I'll go to the game film. And again, like, they have to show up. These drills have to show up, and they got to show up all the time. And so I think, like, when we do the same, we have our everyday drills we do obviously every day. And I think we constantly have to challenge our guys, and we find different ways to, frame these things and different, we'll do the kneeling base drive and some of those different things occasionally, but we really have to challenge our guys to stay diligent on those things, because we could do like 17 different drills. But again, if the drills are not showing up in the tape all the time, then they're not necessarily helping us in the way that we would want to. So again, we know, like, we're not going to maybe use as many drills as some other folks, and we do have to change it up, some, but ultimately, we want to feel really confident that at some point in time when these drills stop showing up in our tape, then we're going to do other drills. So as you check out, this again is just kind of base drive in game situations. So these particular defensive linemen are going to play their gaps. Okay. So we don't talk to our guys necessarily. And again, we do steps on air, but we don't ever say, like, you're going to take a 6-inch step here, you're going to take a 9-inch step here, you're going to take a 12-inch step here, because ultimately, like, the 3 technique that you're looking at on your screen, well, what if he's a little bit wider? What if he's more of a B-gap guy? What if he's a 4-eye? What if he's like a head up 2? How do you handle that? Do you still take that same step? Well, ultimately, like, your steps have to take to your aiming points. So, and again, we have different aiming points for some of our different zone schemes. We're going to go ISO play side number, backside leg through the crotch in this particular instance. Okay, and as you watch this play out, what you're going to see is those defensive linemen creating space, because as we're working to our aiming points, they have to work really laterally in order to get back into their gap. And the space is going to be created. We're going to hit this thing in the backside D gap, and that D gap is going to show up where the ball started, because we're working so hard to those aiming points. As you kind of watch this, pretty good job at the left tackle as well. Hardest thing about this is what happens when the defensive lineman backdoors our offensive lineman. There's technically always supposed to be an offensive lineman there, and that functions a lot of different ways in different circumstances, okay? But ultimately, as the aiming points change, your directive changes. So if this 2I lined up across the number 68 goes a little bit harder inside, okay, well, he's going to get heavier and thicker and stay on his aiming point and get vertical on his aiming point. So it's kind of, I don't want to say foolproof, but it's helpful for us to know that as that defensive lineman backdoors us, my aiming point is his play side number. So if I'm not on balance, if I'm not in control of my body in that way, then I think it's really important for those guys to be under, to be under control and to be on balance so they can adjust as the defensive lineman adjusts or as he's trying to play gap. So when we block our inside zone, we've got 3 rules, all right? We've got 3 prime directives, okay? So gap, heavy, reference point, okay? All right, if I've got a guy in my gap, I block the guy in my gap, I use my aiming points. If I don't have somebody in my gap, I'm going to be heavy on whatever's in my backside gap, okay? And if I have neither of the first 2 things, okay, for instance, if this right guard, this 3 decided to play so heavy onto the tackle that he was not really involved in the right guard's course anymore, then he's going to work to his reference point, okay, which ultimately is going to take him back to the top of it where that guy's going to be his gap side defender and he's going to work to his aiming point. So essentially, if you know the 3 rules, you're always going to be right. So, and we're going the opposite direction here, excuse me. So we're going to the right here. So again, it's just another example of base drive as you watch the right guard, okay? And so again, kind of what the notation says is the block is vertical in nature, but the DT has to defend that B gap. So what we like the most about this scheme and the way that we teach it, okay, and kind of what tends to happen, okay, is that defensive lineman is never at a point in time when he's easier to move than when he's out of his gap and he's got to get back into his gap. So he's essentially, he's not in the B gap anymore and he's got to scramble to get back into the B gap, okay? So for us, there's a really nice instance here where you can see we're a little bit stalemated. He runs to try to get back into his gap and Max ends up running him out to the hash and creating a lot of space. Obviously, we don't take that particular space, but we're creating space. And again, we talk to these guys all the time. Our goal as an offensive line is not to move these guys vertically. Our goal is to create space. Now, a lot of times that means we move them vertically, okay? But ultimately, like if there's space there, we're right. And so as we work to our aiming points, sometimes that means if guys, and so it really becomes dependent upon how the defense wants to play their gaps. If they want to play them very vertically, then the space is probably going to end up being very vertical. If they want to play their gaps very laterally and gap charge and do some of those types of things and blitz and things, then there's going to end up being a lot of lateral wash and the space is going to be created in that way. So we don't care which it is. We just work to our aiming points and know that, the backs can be coached to find the space. So, again, as you watch kind of the play unfold, all right, again, they're going to gap exchange here on the backside, and our tight end and left tackle are going to do a nice job switching that thing off. The space ends up being probably more lateral in that particular instance. Okay, so a couple other instances, just, and again, we're still talking about like the drills, right? So base drive in our drills. So something to think about as and again, this is just kind of our rationale behind like why we're doing what we're doing. As we work to our aiming points, D-line will do what their coach is doing, return back to their gap. This is kind of the heels of what we talked about on the last snap. And, as we work back into their gap, they're forced to work laterally. They have to raise their hips higher than they would like to. And that's how we end up creating space. So again, you kind of see the diagram of right guard works to his aiming points, defensive lineman works laterally to get back into his gap, okay? Right tackle works to his aiming points, defensive lineman works back into his gap, right tackle continue works to his aiming points, D lineman again works to his gap, aiming points, gap, and you end up with all this space, right? They started out here and they end up, okay, now we're gonna struggle here with the right guard in this particular instance. A really nice job here by the right tackle, okay, and what I want to call, and again, we didn't put all the good ones on here. But this is a really good example what we coach these guys to do in terms of their aiming points, the eyes are going to go to the play side number and the backside leg is going to go through the crotch. So as you watch the right guard, all right, his eyes are pretty good on the first step, but he's just kind of shuffling his backside leg, all right? As soon as he tries to take it towards the crotch, he gets up onto his toes, okay? And as soon as he gets up onto his toes, he gets tossed, okay? So kind of speaks again to what we're talking about in terms of being on balance, being more important probably than your pad level. Okay, pad level is really important as well, but you got to have your cleats on the ground or it doesn't matter how low your pads are, okay? All right, so he gets tossed and they make the play here on our back. So, really good example here. And so I think one of my favorite things about this whole deal is, and again, so this is we had to play Lindenwood. Lindenwood was a playoff team, and so that, I mean, this nose is like 340 pounds. He's a big lad. So I think our way of trying to equalize those, we did a bunch of different things, right? We like to read those guys in some different schemes and kind of put them in space where they don't want to be. But then ultimately, the best way to take a big guy like this, all right, and make it easy to move him so he can't hunker in there and just screw everything up, is by giving him the feeling that he's not in his gap. And Max doesn't even ever get necessarily to his aiming points on this thing, all right? But he continually works to him. And so, again, when you watch 90 and where he started out, 2 yards from the hash, ends up, laterally, 5 yards on the other side of the hash. So when you take, again, with our, 295-pound, right guard, so I think it's a really nice, this particular scheme is a really nice equalizer, when there's bigger players that you have to deal with and you don't necessarily want to like run dive right into this guy's, stomach. That's not anybody's idea of a great time. So, all right. So as we talked about earlier, okay, so we've got our order of operations. If you have somebody in your gap, that would be the base drive. Okay. So I have somebody in my gap. I'm working on my aiming points. I'm essentially taking the play side 3/4 of this guy. Okay, so if I don't, all right, which happens typically to guards. Okay, so we probably do this drill more with the guards and maybe to a lesser extent with the centers. The tackles don't end up doing it that much, but that's kind of changing here as, you get instances in which backside defensive ends are trying to play tackles really heavy or they're trying to come across their face or do those kinds of things. So this is something when, the backside guard's got a 3 technique, the front side guard's got an inside shade or a 2-eye or a 2. Okay. Cell's going to work inside zone here to his left with the thought that he doesn't have anybody in his play side gap. Okay. All right. And we do this drill probably more than we do anything else. So, so he's going to be really tight with his footwork. His feet are in the ground. He's heavy with that shoulder. He's essentially on his own aiming points. There's just not anything in his gap. So he ends up being more vertical than he is lateral. And in the base drive, we have somebody in our gap. We're essentially tight reaching that guy. We don't like to say that. So I don't like to say the word reach to guys and give them the impression that we're trying to run around that guy. We want to get to our aiming points and we want to take the thing vertical. So again, he's really thick. His feet are in the ground. He's physical and aggressive with that backside knee in terms of running it through the crotch of the defensive lineman. So that's a pretty good example of what we would want on the shoulder drill. All right. Another practice rep. Okay. A lot of good things here. All right. The only thing I would say about Trevor on this particular one, if you watch 68, he's kind of turned almost a little bit. We want to be really square. He's all right. A pretty good example of what we would want that thing to look like. Okay, really good example, game example. Again, these things got to show up in games. All right, as you watch the right guard. Okay, and again, he's going to work this backside 3 technique with the right tackle. He's going to work that backside backer. Really good example. And my favorite part about this particular rep is just how on balance Max is as he's doing this. Okay, and we watch it slow-mo. All right, he's waiting. So being on balance in this way gives us a variety of different things that it's possible for us to do. So this is kind of your, the ankle flexibility is really key. When we in terms of things that we train, things that we talk about, being on balance, some of those things. But he's got to have that balance in order to have autonomy in terms of whenever this guy runs downhill, I don't know when it is, all right? But in order for me to go through my order of operations, right now I don't have anything that's threatening my gap. He's got a guy in his gap, but nothing that's threatening. So he's going to be heavy on whatever's in his backside gap. And as soon as this backside backer becomes threatening, now I've got to work to my aiming points, because now I go back to the first part of the order of operations. Okay, now I have a gap side defender. Now I have to go work. Now, if he's, again, not on balance at any point in time, all right, he's not going to be able to come off his backer when he wants to, all right? So really, really good by Max. And we moved it some, okay? There's not like this three technique is a yard off the football-ish, but he did a really good job staying on balance, all right? The right tackle is going to finish this thing off for him. Don't love necessarily that he didn't work as well to his aiming points on this linebacker when that linebacker ran downhill. And the only thing that I would that we try to do, that I would definitely advise, is we don't get on these guys when that backer runs through and they don't, and we whiff on that guy, because we don't ever want to make them scared to get off on that three technique. We don't want to slow them down. Number one job of this particular instance in this particular combo, bludgeon the three technique. Get after the three technique, and we're not then going to get all over these guys or jump down their throats if they miss on that linebacker, because they're so caught up bludgeoning the guy. Okay. At the same time, we have to coach it, and we know that we have to come off to that guy. So anytime this happens and we whiff on that guy, and this has happened with Max tons of times in practice and over the course of the 2 years that he's been with us, we don't get on him and say, hey, listen, you need to come off a little bit faster, because we don't ever want to slow those guys down when they're comboing. In this instance, obviously great run by the back. So this is kind of the two-man version of the shoulder drill. A couple things here. All right, again, back to practice reps. All right, so as you watch the right guard, he's just maybe a touch turned more so than we would want him to be. All right, want him to be square to line of scrimmage. We don't want him opening up thinking that this right tackle is going to blast this thing across his face. If he does, that's fine, but we don't want him opening up his hips in that way. We want to stay as square as we can. And again, the right tackle is just a touch more ducked, okay? We would like him to have his face mask and not his helmet. Face mask, not helmet. We want guys keeping their heads up. Obviously, safety is crucial. All our guys wear those, the caps, the concussion prevention caps and things like that. So obviously that's a big deal, not just for, he's getting himself off balance. One, it's making him hard to do what he needs to do. And then the other thing, obviously, is safety is critically important in 2020. So just kind of some things that we see that are, but they're doing a nice job, obviously, in terms of staying balanced, staying tight with their hands. Nobody's getting overextended, et cetera. So there's some good things going on there, definitely. All right, so this goes back to another practice rep, really good example of our left guard, okay? All right, only thing I would say is I don't love that as he takes his second step is maybe not quite on the ground. He comes back onto his toes and things like that. But this is just a little bit better example, other than we don't do a great job here running our feet through contact on that backer. So just a little bit better example here with Trevor and Dejan on that work and that shoulder drill. All right, so I don't think there's a better clip that we have, okay, that would exhibit when defensive linemen get out of their gap and they're chasing and trying to get back in their gap, how easy it is to move those guys and, to really displace them vertically and horizontally, other than this particular one against Davenport, as one of the best defenses in the league and is extremely well coached. But again, what they're really doing is this three technique gets out of his gap, or the two-eye to the backside gets out of his gap really quickly. Max, again, has a play side guy, so he's just thinking base drive on it, but he's always going to bring his shoulder with him, okay? And as that defensive lineman gets out of his gap, and you can see immediately he takes a step across his body trying to get back into his gap, and his hips are so high at that point in time that it makes it easy for us to displace them and create some space for our back to run. So, but when those guys get out of their gaps, they become so much easier to move. And that's a really good example of kind of exactly what we want to get done as we do that. All right. And the spot shadow here is going to be on these front side 3 guys. And again, they're going to identify our mic point and work to that guy. Really good example, again, of the guard being really thick through the 2-eye, using that shoulder drill, working to that linebacker, and then doing a really nice job finishing on that linebacker. But again, as you watch these clips, watch where the defenders start and where they finish in terms of the lateral and horizontal movement of the thing. That's kind of a dirty 5-yard run. But so this is Ashland again, extremely good, consistently successful team in our league and very well coached. So this would be like a slightly quicker version. So I think like the biggest thing about like this particular deal of the shoulder situation is it's going to be a little bit different when that backer's in a 2-eye or a 20-eye, versus a 20, versus a 30, versus a 40, et cetera. So again, that's one thing we saw and we know it with reps. So he's got an inclination right now because that backer is sitting behind the 3 technique. He's probably going to be a little bit thicker and a little bit slower, and he's going to have a little bit more time to get after this 3 technique than maybe he would if that guy was in a 20-eye and he was ready to run downhill. So he's going to get a pre-snap indication like, okay, this is how much leverage I have. This is how thick I'm going to be. But at the same time, if he's on balance, which he gets a little bit off balance here, he's still able to recover and get on this guy. But if he's on balance, then he's going to be able to do whatever he wants, and he's going to be able to react to whatever situations he's being given. All right. And then, again, you kind of have examples of all these things, whether right, wrong, or indifferent in almost every snap. Somebody's got a guy in their gap and somebody's got a guy in their backside gap across the board. Guys are doing kind of one of those 2 things. And again, not that we like coaching the negative ones, but as you see, like the left tackle that just didn't spend a ton of time with us gets overextended immediately. Okay. And as you watch this, all right, he does a good job attacking. As soon as he gets overextended, all right, it makes it very difficult, and there's kind of a stoppage in terms of us being able to move that guy. So we get overextended, then we get back tight, then we get our feet back going. Again, we talk about that overextension in terms of we want to finish these things with our knee drives and with our hips and with our lower body. We don't want to get our upper body as involved. Okay, and another pretty good example when you watch the 2 guards working, a backside 3, frontside 2-eye. We've got obviously wider 5 techniques here, so we're going to end up throwing this one, which is like our favorite thing, all right? We RPO it, and it's not our favorite thing. Sarcasm doesn't come across as it's not as good over Zoom, unfortunately, as when you're in a room, but we don't obviously like having huge gaping holes for big plays and then throwing the ball, but throwing the ball is okay too. We signed up for it, we knew. But so the other part of this is these guys have to understand like what's on their course and what's not. So if this 2-eye plays like really heavy into the center, their left guard might not touch him. Okay. Now, if he plays his 2-eye, he plays his shade, he plays where he's lined up. Obviously, we're going to be really heavy and really thick. But we don't want guys, again, as you create this type of movement, because that's where our aiming points are on all these defenders. All right. And that's the type of movement we should see based on whichever of these 6 guys are defending, whichever of these gaps. We don't then want to have our left guard kind of working against the grain in that way unless he has to, because they're vacating a gap and they're mistaken, which doesn't happen very often. It really doesn't happen very often with your better teams like these guys. So just kind of another thing to understand is you understand how we're creating the space and what we're thinking about as we're doing that stuff. So, yeah, and again, just want to thank Coach McElvany and the MHSAA and all you guys for giving us an opportunity to talk to you. Hopefully, you guys glean something from it, and anything we can do, to help or talk more about this or any of those things, we really appreciate. Any guys that want to reach out or have any questions about any of those things, we're always available. Go Cards.